So in order to start the construction of the Splendor gown, the first thing we're going to do is take our side fronts and our front sections and sew them together. Before setting those first stitches, you want to make sure that you take your scissors and clip in towards the curved edges of the pieces of your pattern. From there, you want to also make a note that on that side front section, we are going to be taking a cut in from that corner piece to the dot as indicated on the pattern. I'm going to be putting that side front section to the front section without a lot of pins today. I'm going to use my needle down position in the fabric to make it a little bit easier to manipulate around those curved edges. With the side front section sewn to the front, we'll go ahead and grab those back pieces and do the same thing. We're going to get all those seams pressed open, and the next step is going to be to take the front and the back sections and sew them together at the shoulders, right here. We're going to trim down that seam allowance, and also remember to make that cut in from that corner into the dot as indicated on the pattern. We're going to turn the sleeve edge up 1/4 inch and give it a hard press, and then we'll sew the front and back sections together at the side seam. With the side seam sewn and pressed, this is where we are so far with the bodice. We have that sleeve edge tucked in 1/4 inch and it's hard pressed. And now we're going to set the bodice to the side for a moment and work on the skirt assembly. The skirt is constructed of 4 different panels, and we're going to take one of the 4 panels that we cut on the fold and we're going to actually fold it in half, and then we're going to split the back, and that's actually going to make the right and left back opening of the skirt. We're going to take all the skirt pieces and sew them together over at the sewing machine. Now that we have the skirt assembly constructed and we've pressed all the seams open, we have our bodice constructed. We're going to turn our attention to the skirt assembly lining. We're going to construct it in the exact same way, splitting that 4th folded panel and making the back sections. And we'll also get the bodice lining constructed off camera. With the skirt lining assembly finished, you have a choice at this point to either hem those 2 pieces separately, or in this video, I'm going to show you my preferred method, which is to place the skirt lining right sides together to the actual skirt and sew the hemline. Once you have the lining turned in on the skirt assembly and you've pressed the hem edge, we're going to actually sew both the right and left back openings closed with a zigzag stitch. The next step is going to be to run a gather stitch along the waist edge of the skirt. Normally, if I'm working with a smaller doll, I may just run 1 gathering stitch, but in this case, because of the size and volume of this actual skirt, I'm going to use 2. With our gather stitches in place, we're going to grab the bodice to the actual dress. We're going to pull those gathers evenly to fit that bodice. We're going to place it right sides together, and we're going to sew the waist seam. If you're feeling a little bit tentative about doing this, you can always baste it in place first to make sure that the gathers are evenly distributed. Once you've checked both sides and you're happy with the way the gathers turned out, you're going to press the seam allowance up towards the bodice. The next step is to grab that center back piece of the skirt and see where it actually stops for the center back seam, which is going to create the zipper opening. Next, you'll place the skirt assembly right sides together and sew from the hem edge to that dot as indicated on the pattern. After marking where the center back seam stops, you may also find it helpful to mark the actual seam allowance of the back. For this particular pattern for the Smart Doll, the back center seam is actually a 1/2 inch, but on some of the Splendor patterns, it may indicate that the back seam is 3/8 inch, and you want to just make sure you're reading the specific directions included with your pattern. With the back seam sewn, we're actually just going to press that open and prepare to install our zipper. Before moving on to the step of actually putting the zipper in place, you want to verify that that waist seam is going to line up from that dot to the actual waist edge. And in this case, I think it looks pretty good, as well as at the top edge too. So now that we're pretty confident that the opening is correct, we're going to grab our zipper. And in this case, we're using a YKK 12-inch zipper that we're going to cut down to size. I'm going to place the base or the closed end of the zipper just beneath that actual finished dot. I'm going to finish it up one side and then the other. I find that to be easier because I can pin and control the other side of the garment. So I'm going to turn the dress right side out and get that first side hand sewn. As I'm pinning the zipper up on one side, I'm making sure that that folded edge, which is pretty crisp, is right over the center of the zipper teeth. You want to do that all the way from the closed center back dot to the actual opening at the top of the bodice. To set my stitches on the zipper, I'm going to start on the back side of the zipper at the very top. I'm going to be about 1/8 inch from the actual zipper teeth, and I'm just going to draw it through. And since this is going to be covered by the seam allowance when I attach the bodice lining, I'm just going to make sure I really get a good secure stitch at the top. The stitch that I like to use to set the zipper is just a really small running stitch. I come through the back of the actual zipper, and then I come through the top. Then I actually go to the right side, back under, back through, and make a really tiny prick to the surface, and then I just continue in that way. So you can see the stitch just a little bit at the top, just like you would if you set it with your sewing machine, but I'm trying to keep my stitches nice and even and consistent and close to the edge of the zipper tape. Let me finish down this side all the way to the zipper stop, and I'll show you how I pin the other side up and finish the zipper. Once you have that second side of the zipper actually pinned all the way to the top, you're going to repeat that same stitch pattern all the way to the top of the bodice, and then we'll actually add the bodice lining. With the zipper stitched in, you do want to check the functioning and make sure that you didn't have any of your stitches catch into the zipper. So you want to make sure that it opens all the way to the bottom, which in this case, it looks like it does, which is fantastic. From here, we can go ahead and grab our doll and get a quick fit, and then we'll move on to the next step. I've slid the dress on the doll for a quick fit to make sure everything's coming together, and I think it's looking pretty good. I like the way that it's sitting through her waist, and remember, we're going to be taking gathers at the bust line as well as around the sleeve area, so that should be a little bit loose. As we turn the doll over, we can see how that zipper installation turned out. You can see that there's a little bit of looseness through the waist, but you want to remember that we are going to add a lining for the bodice, so you don't want it to be too tight. The function of the zipper has already been checked, so the next thing we need to do is move on to the step of applying the lining to the bodice. Off camera, I already completed the lining for the bodice with the same exact steps that I used to create the exterior portion of the garment. The only difference here is you're going to want to turn up the hem edge of the bodice lining by 1/4 inch and give it a hard press. So I'm going to do that step, and then I'm going to apply the bodice to the actual top, right sides together, and sew around the neckline. One additional thing that you want to check before you actually clip in towards the seam allowance at the top of the bodice is that the zipper lines up equally on both sides. So you want to make sure you run your zipper up and that your seams are going to match exactly to each other so that when you turn the lining into the dress, you get a perfect finish at the back. We have a few hand finishing steps and we're almost done with the project. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your needle and thread and you're going to sew the lining of the sleeve to the actual sleeve. Then you're going to pin it right down the zipper tape, making sure not to interfere with the functioning of the zipper teeth. You're going to take that hard pressed lining that's turned under 1/4 inch and attach it to the seam at the skirt, and you're going to repeat that up the second side of the bodice. After that, we'll put the dress back on the doll and we'll get our final gathers around the bust and sleeve edges. So here's the garment so far, and as you can see, we have all the lining pieces attached to the actual dress. So we're going to turn it right side out, and then we're going to put it back on the doll to get those final gathers. At this stage, you want to be really careful, especially since the Smart Doll is a very soft vinyl, so you want to be super careful with your stitches that you don't actually poke her. So let me get that turned out, we'll get it on the doll, and I'll show you what we do next. You can refer back to the pattern pieces for this step to see where you're going to actually place the gathers. If you feel more comfortable, you can grab a heat erasable marker and do this step. You're going to go with the center of the actual bodice, the side seam, right here that goes underneath the armpit, and also across the top of the sleeve. When you look at the back of the garment, you can see that there's quite a gap here. This is where one of those gathers go to create this sort of cap sleeve effect. You're also going to do the center back seam, center back side seam, and those gathers will make the top fit her very nicely around the bust. So if you feel comfortable, go ahead and grab that heat erasable marker, put a few marks on your pattern, start the stitches from the inside of the lining and go towards the top, and then pull them together as you're working. So let me show you a few examples here as we work our way across the bodice. So at this stage, you can already see how that ruching or that gathering at the top of the bodice is starting to look. So it actually starts to make all of those gaps disappear, which is really, really good. So once we do the center one, it'll really be noticeable, but let me get the other side completed up to the same level as we did this side, and then we'll finish off with that center gathered seam. Here's a quick peek at all the gathers being completed with the exception of the center front. So as you can see, it's actually starting to fit her a little bit well with every gather that we take. So let me grab my needle and thread and finish that last one, and then we'll get those final photographs. With the center seam complete, we actually have finished our sewing tutorial for today. Thank you guys so much for coming along with me. I think the Smart Doll looks great in her new gown. If you have any questions, please list it in the comment section below. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.